Hi, everybody. My name is Larry Chretien, and I'm the Executive Director at Green Energy Consumers Alliance. And with me today is Mikaela Hondros-McCarthy. Mikaela has two jobs with our organization. She's our Financial Director, and she's also our Renewable Energy Procurement Director. Today, we're going to talk about a report that we recently produced about the impact of green municipal aggregation in Massachusetts on the energy system and how it's saving consumers money. Ordinarily, we would have you'd have the fun of seeing our faces, but that part of the video is not working, at least not now. But the slides are showing, I hope, and so we'll give our presentation. Mikaela, if you could go to the next slide. Because we have a lot of people have registered and are with us right now, you're all muted, but if you have questions or comments, go to the questions box on go to meeting. You can find that usually on the left hand of your screen. If you have technical questions, use the questions box as well, and Adriana will try to help you out. This webinar is being recorded. And if we can't answer all the questions today, we will email them out to people. And we'll handle the questions at the end because we might answer some of the questions as we go. As a reminder, some of you may know us, some of you may not. We're a nonprofit organization. We're celebrating our 40th year. Our mission is to harness the power of energy consumers to speed the transition to a zero carbon future. We're based in Boston and Providence. We have offices in both cities, and we serve the two states, Massachusetts and Rhode Island. We're kind of unusual as a nonprofit in that we run programs, services where consumers can tap into, kind of run it like a business, where we can help you buy green electricity, such as we're talking about today. Maybe we can help you get an electric car or a heat pump or solar panels. Those are, pay for service programs. And then we also do public policy advocacy, where we try to influence better energy and climate policy at the state level in both of our states. So today's topic is green municipal aggregation. So what is it? Municipal aggregation is the process by which a community in Massachusetts is able to purchase electricity in bulk from a competitive power supplier on behalf of the residents and businesses within the community. This has been going on in Massachusetts for a couple of decades, and we're hoping in 2023 it'll start up in Rhode Island. There are several communities that have adopted the model there. We'll talk about that in a bit. But green municipal aggregation is something that we designed along with our partners at Good Energy. It's where the electricity supply that's offered by the community on a default basis includes more Class 1 renewable energy content than's required by state law, the Massachusetts Renewable Portfolio Standard and the Clean Energy Standard. By Class 1, we're talking about primarily wind and solar, but also anaerobic digestion from water and sewer facilities and low impact hydro, small hydro projects. Other people might call it community choice aggregation or CCA. Some people call it community choice energy or electricity, CCE. So just to be clear, we're talking about affecting the supply or source of the energy. On the graphic, you can see that, but the delivery of the power through the wires and through the billing of the customers and maintaining the lines, that's all done by the utility. That would be National Grid or Eversource or Unitil in Massachusetts, and in Rhode Island, it's now Rhode Island Energy. And what do you get from it? You get better rates, local control, and cleaner energy. Next slide. So why do we love it? Why is it, why in our viewpoint do the results that we're going to talk about prove success? It produces a lot of green power without subsidy. The government's not offering us incentives to do this. We're pooling purchasing power. So it's the projects might get some support, but the purchase of the power is something we're accomplishing through group buying. And we say it's socially equitable because what happens in all the communities that we work, if someone wants to save a little money and not buy more renewable energy than required by law, they can do what we call opt down, and so they can get the benefits of the lower rate without having to and save a little bit more money. The other advantage is all the benefits, all the clean air that we get, that goes to everybody, so nobody's left behind in that sense. It's scalable. Every community can add more renewable energy if it wants to, and we can add more communities, and we're seeing both of those things happen. And then it can be implemented in the near term. We'll talk in a little bit about how it's goes slower than it should because the state's not doing its job well. But in general, we're saying this is probably having the biggest impact in a short period of time than anything else a city or town could do to reduce its carbon footprint. And so this graph is showing you that over time, how the Massachusetts Clean Energy Standard and Renewable Portfolio Standard increases. That's the largest line. It's light green. The blue line is what the Clean Energy Standard would require. And what we're adding is, with the dark green, is more renewable energy than required by law. And so what we're doing here essentially is we're speeding up the date by which we can have 100% green electricity in Massachusetts. And we can speed up how much we're going to have by 2030. Next slide. So here's how it works. We call it the default product. Every community that wants to do an aggregation decides for itself how much more renewable energy than it's going to go by the above state law. And so here we're showing an example of a community that's going 5% above the state law. It can be 10%. We're going to get into that. Some communities add a lot more than that. And according to municipal aggregation, everybody, the law in Massachusetts, it's been around for 2 decades, and the local decision makers will say everybody is in the town is in the program unless they take one of these actions. So one option is if somebody wants to go to 100% renewable energy, they can opt into that. If they want to save money, they can opt into a program or opt down to a product that saves money but doesn't add more renewable energy. But the consumer also has these other options. They can, if they don't like the product for some reason, they can go back to their utility, National Grid, Eversource, or Unitil, or they can choose to stay with a competitive power supplier that's offering electricity that is not part of the aggregation. Alternatively, if a customer is with a competitive power supplier, they can opt into the aggregation. They should read the contract carefully to make sure they're not paying a penalty for leaving the competitive power supplier. But when the competitive power supply contract is over, they're welcome to join the aggregation. So this is another reason why we say that it's equitable, it's fair. People have these options, but we're creating a local option where consumers can get a good deal. So this diagram is a little busy, but sort of explains what we do as an organization. On the right-hand side is your community. You're a consumer in one of those houses, perhaps. And the Good Energy is the consultant that we work with that serves a lot of communities. They negotiate on behalf of the town electricity supply from competitive power suppliers. It's managed competition, where the competitive power supplier says, oh, that town is got 20,000 households. We're going to offer electricity to that at a certain price. Good Energy takes the price back to the town. They decide whether or not they want to accept it, whether they want a 1-year contract, a 2-year contract, a 3-year contract. The electricity flows from the competitive power supplier to the community. The competitive power supplier is required by state law to buy electricity from generators and to buy renewable energy certificates at least equal to what the state's requirements are. Where we come in as an organization, at the top of the screen, is we add more renewable energy certificates than required by law. We add the incremental amount, might be 5%, 10%, 20%, whatever the town wants. And we sell those to the competitive power supplier, or essentially help green up the whole program. And that flows into the community as well. So we don't have any contracts ourselves with Good Energy, but we kind of work hand in hand with them in order to serve the community. And next slide. Here is Good Energy. A little story about them is they're a consultant that serves many states, and they are serving over 50 cities and towns in Massachusetts, about half of which we are working with them on to make them green. We worked with them. Our first two communities in this model were Melrose and Dedham, back starting on January 1st, 2016. And Good Energy is preparing to work with several communities in Rhode Island, hopefully by 2023. Next slide. So here's the benefit. Our process provides aggregations the choice of renewable energy certificates provided through a competitive power supplier or us. Typically, that's what Good Energy does, is they manage that procurement. Communities always have been choosing our green electricity. We're competitive on price, and we offer, we feel, the greenest of renewable energy. All the RECs, all the renewable energy certificates are from New England. By law, we could provide RECs from New York or Canada, but we don't. We're trying to keep it as local as we can. You may be aware that the 6 New England states form a power pool, and so we want to stay within that geographic frame. We don't include biomass that involves combustion of biomass. We do support anaerobic digestion, which is capturing the methane from a water and sewer facility. And we often sign long-term contracts with projects that helps them get built, whereas most suppliers don't do that. And again, we usually are the lowest cost option for a community anyway, because this is really what we do every day. We've got staff who are devoted to this model. Next slide. So here we have a map, and it's in our report. We color coded it. Dark green means the communities are adding a very high percentage of renewable energy above the state's requirement. Then it gets a little bit, the shade goes a little different. So a lighter green is 20 to 29%, then it goes to 10 to 19, a lot or 5 to 9%. And then we've looked at every community. We think we're correct, but if you think we've made a mistake, just point that out to us. But what we're commenting on is in their default product, the one that everybody has the opportunity to stay with the aggregation. We're seeing that we're measuring, the metric we're looking at is how much class 1 renewable content is in the default product. And as you can see, there are some communities, the dark brown ones, they are aggregating for consumers, but they are not adding any green at all. A lighter brown is they're aggregating for consumers, and they allow the consumers to opt up, but it's not in the default product. And then we have a list of communities that are waiting to join aggregation. And then there's 41 cities and towns that have a municipal light facility. Over on the right, there's an academic person, David Sue, who has been tracking, and you can see how many more, the population in Massachusetts now. Most consumers in Massachusetts are in cities and towns that have aggregation. Next slide. So as of the date of this report, we believe 215 cities and towns have active aggregation plans or are researching. Of those, 49 communities have additional green power above 5%, which is very impressive. 44 communities have no mass class 1 content, but they do offer opt-up options. and 42 do not offer Class 1 content. 36 are researching it, aggregation, waiting for DPU approval. That's the Department of Public Utilities, which has to approve all the plans that local cities and towns submit, or they've been approved and they're waiting for their plan to start. So what we're seeing is, and our goal as an organization is to have the whole map be green, dark green. What we want to see is the 44 communities that have no Class 1 content to offer Class 1 content, and as well as the ones that are aggregating that but don't have any green at all. So we want to move people from brown to dark green, or at least light green in between. Next one. Here are communities that we serve. There's the list in front of you. Arlington, Bedford, Brookline, Dedham, Fairhaven, Gloucester, Hamilton, Medford, Melrose, Millis, Rockland, Somerville, Stoneham, Waltham, Westford, Winchester, and Milton. A little out of order. We're very happy to serve those. Those are the communities that Green Energy Consumers is serving. Good Energy, as I explained, is serving other communities that aren't necessarily doing green municipal aggregation. And the picture there is Medford. Next slide. We take great care to buy projects as close to home as possible. This map is on our website, and it shows that we buy whenever possible from projects in Massachusetts or Rhode Island. Sometimes we go to New Hampshire and Maine and Vermont, and a little bit in Connecticut. A lot of wind and solar. Wind is by far our #1 source. Next slide. There are communities that were recently approved by the Department of Public Utilities, and they will be starting maybe later 2022, more likely maybe 2023. Situate, Westwood, Cohasset, and Marshfield will be working with them, but then there are several others as well. And here's a lot of recently approved communities have waited almost 1 year for DPU approval, which we think is unacceptable. We think that the process should take no more than 3 months at the State Department of Public Utilities. And some communities are still waiting, and we'll highlight Andover, Quincy, and Weston, but there are more that are waiting for almost 2 years, and we think that's a crime. Next slide. So there's a list of communities that we're indicating again that are waiting for DPU approval. The impact we think is enormous. By next year, aggregations will add about 1 million megawatt hours of clean power per year above the state requirement. And that's the equivalent of 3 large wind turbines. And that's voluntary demand. That's above and beyond the state's mandate. So that's making the grid cleaner and getting cleaner faster than required by state law. And the graph on the right shows the impact that it's had on our organization. We were doing quite well back in 2016, but as you can see, every year we're growing by adding more communities. And one thing about the communities is a lot of them that might start at 5 or 10%, and then when their contract is up for renewal, they tend to add more content with the second or third contracts. Next slide. Offshore wind, in our viewpoint, is the future of our green electricity in Massachusetts and New England. And so if we're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by what we need, 50% by 2030, according to state law, we're going to have to procure a lot more offshore wind. And what we like to do at this organization is connect the dots. And so we love aggregation and we love offshore wind. And so we work very closely with legislators in the recently passed climate bill that was signed just a couple of weeks ago. And that has a couple of provisions in the bill that are sort of giving preferential treatment to an offshore wind developer that is willing to partner with a municipal aggregation. And the Clean Energy Center, which is a great state agency that has funding to support renewable energy, is now authorized to help connect offshore wind to municipal aggregation. And so we're very happy to have had that contribution to the climate bill. Next slide. And I think this is your area, Mikaela.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. So a big part of the report that we just put out in June really has to do with comparing how the electricity rates compare between basic service rates and aggregation rates. So we took all of the data that we could gather from the communities that we specifically serve. So there's 17 communities starting with Dedham and Melrose back in 2017. And we also collected the data that's publicly available for some other aggregations in the area in Massachusetts. So we looked at 49 municipalities total, and we compared the basic service rates over time to the aggregation rates. So that thick green band that you can see on both charts is the range of all of the aggregations in their respective utilities that have additional renewable content of 5% to 11%. And then any communities that had over 11%, we broke out in their separate colors and separate lines. So so you can kind of see that even those communities, in some cases that had above 11%, were still comparing favorably with basic service rates. And I have to say that the disclaimer that we always say is that we can't, in aggregation, really say that there's guaranteed savings, but if you look at these charts, we're looking at it over a time period of 4 or 5 years. In many cases, the aggregation rates compare favorably to the basic service rates, and it also provides some price stability. So the utility rates change every 6 months. National Grid changes in April, and then again in October, and Eversource changes every January and July. So that's where you can see the variability in those blue lines. And then the current rate for Eversource is 17.87 cents per kilowatt hour, and the current rate for National Grid is 11.49 cents per kilowatt hour. So here we're looking at just Eversource communities, and I've listed them out on the right here. So in both cases, if you're comparing the communities that have between 5 and 11% renewable content, they've saved over time 1.35 cents per kilowatt hour versus the basic service rates. So while achieving, all of those things that we like to see, the price stability and definitely the additional renewable content, a lot of these communities are still saving money. And then, so it was 1.35 cents per kilowatt hour when we put the report out back in June. So that was before we knew what the most recent basic service rate for Eversource was back, so towards the end of this graph, where it really increases quite a bit. So we updated the calculation, taking that period into account, and the savings was actually 1.9 cents per kilowatt hour through November. So on Eversource specifically, because the rate jumped up in that last period, aggregations enjoyed even more savings. So especially right now would be a great time to be in a community that participates in aggregation. And we did the same thing for National Grid. The most recent National Grid rate of the 11.49 cents per kilowatt hour was lower than Eversource's. So that updated calculation was a savings of like 1.23 cents per kilowatt hour, which is still favorable. And we have no idea what the new National Grid rates will be for the next iteration. I don't know if I'd call this an indicator, but another piece of information you could call it would be that the Eversource rates for New Hampshire just that came out for the August through February period is 22.5 cents per kilowatt hour, which is even higher than that Eversource rate. So especially now with energy prices being what they are, there's a big advantage to being in an aggregation, and it makes it even more of a shame that some of those communities that have been waiting for DPU approval didn't get a chance to start their plans sooner. Larry, I think this is back to you.
Thank you, Mikaela. So what's related to aggregation is the fact that the Attorney General, Maura Healey, has commissioned 3 reports, and where they analyzed what customers were paying if they had a competitive power supplier that was not through an aggregation to what they would have paid had they stayed on utility basic service. And over 5 years, consumers paid $426 million more on electricity than necessary, an average of $85 million per year. And what they determined was that low-income consumers and also the elderly and also people of color or people who didn't have English as their first language were twice as likely to pay the higher bills than other customers. So why is that? I think this is the evidence or the proof that competitive power suppliers are not your friend, and that basic service is better than that. What we call basic service is what you would normally get from National Grid, Eversource, or Unitil. But what the report said was, their study excluded what customers were paying when they were with an aggregation. So now, if you look at what Mikaela's data shows, if we're showing that our aggregations are saving money compared to basic service, then they're obviously much, much better than what competitive power suppliers are if you're on your own. And so you might want to look at the Attorney General report as well as ours. Next slide. So when you pull it all together, okay, here's a little bit of math. The current law requires 22% Class 1 renewable energy in Massachusetts. And so if a community adds, there's a typo, if it adds 10% more Class 1 than required by law, it's actually a 45% increase. So it's 10 over 22 is 45%. So it may not sound like a lot saying 10% more Class 1, but it's a big increase over what the state requirement is. So then we looked at what would happen if every customer in the state that was a customer of Eversource, National Grid, and Unitil, if they participated at 10%, it would amount to 1.6 million megawatt hours of clean energy, which is, again, it's more than what we estimate for 2023. So there's still room for more communities. And that is just residential customers. A lot of small businesses are also enrolled in Green Municipal Aggregation. The economic impact, okay, Mikaela's already said the savings have been an average of 1.3 cents per kilowatt hour. That was as of a couple of months ago. It's gone up, the savings since then. That's an average savings of about $78 per year. So you're getting cleaner power at lower cost. And that's what the data is showing. And if we were to extrapolate to all residential customers of Eversource, National Grid, and Unitil, the savings would be $208 million per year compared to basic service. Now remember, that's $208 million. That's on top of the $85 million per year that the Attorney General found that what customers were overpaying if they chose a competitive power supplier. So there's a lot at stake. There's $200 to $300 million worth of benefit to having aggregation on top of the environmental benefit. Next slide. We have posted the report. It's not a long one. It's on our website, greenenergyconsumers.org/aggregation. You can also email aggregation@greenenergyconsumers. It's a typo too. My bad. It says .com. It should be .org. And we will answer your question by email. Next slide, please. Looking ahead, the aggregation still has room for innovation. The utilities have filed 5-year grid modernization plans. We have a very dumb grid. We want to have a smart grid. So we want to upgrade the metering, and we want to have software that can accommodate smart meters. That's allows for better two-way communication between a customer and the utility. And that opens up opportunities for time varying rates. Right now, we pay the same rate for electricity, whether we use it at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 o'clock in the afternoon during a peak period of electricity demand, as we do if we are using it at 3 in the morning, when hardly anybody is on the grid. And so what time varying rates can enable is it supports better electric vehicle charging and other demands that can be scheduled or shifted. So if you want to wash your dishes or wash your clothes or dry your clothes and things like that that can be easily shifted to off-peak, you could save money by doing that. And also with our grid modernization, there's more potential for community shared solar integration with aggregation. So what are the big takeaways? The DPU is delaying approvals. We don't think there's a good reason for that. And we think that's harmful. The state has a clean energy and climate plan that did not mention municipal aggregation at all. And we think it's probably their most glaring error. There's huge environmental benefits, there's economic benefits, and there's this very important social equity benefits as well. On this slide there is the email address for myself and for Mikaela. Next slide. Next week, same time, Tuesday, August 30th, and then 7 p.m. We are doing a webinar about the Inflation Reduction Act and how it is going to impact the climate. We're pretty excited about it. It's $369 billion, hundreds of pages. We've been tearing it apart, and we will try to explain what it means for climate action in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. I hope that you've enjoyed today's presentation. We put on a lot of webinars where we're trying to give people news that they can use about climate action. And if you'd be so kind, you can go to our website, greenenergyconsumers.org/donate, and make a contribution for whatever you can afford. That helps pay for the great staff that we have, Mikaela and many others in the organization. Next slide. And we want to invite you. We are having our fall meeting Monday, October 3rd, 5 to 7:30 p.m. It's an outdoor event, the Lawn on D in Boston, over by the World Trade Center. In the fall, we focus our fall meeting on Massachusetts, and in the spring, we have events in Providence. And so we had a lovely event in Providence back a few months ago, and now we're going to celebrate our 40th anniversary at the Lawn on D. It's outside to be COVID safe, but there will be a tent and there'll be a lot of good food and activities, and I would love to see you. You can look for a registration for that. We'll be sending out more information, and we hope that you'll buy a ticket. And next slide. I think we're just about done.
That's it.
So if you have questions, folks, you can fire away, and we'd be happy to answer them.
We did get one question about Class 1 RECs and supply and demand from Edward Quinlan. So he's asking, what happens when the demand for Class 1 RECs exceeds supply? In this event, is there a price cap on REC prices? And long term, how do we free up enough land in New England for the renewables needed?
Okay. Yeah, and I see there's one other question. So I'll answer Edward's. We actually want demand and supply to both grow as evenly as possible, but markets don't work that way. Sometimes demand gets a little bit ahead of supply. Sometimes supply gets a little bit ahead of demand. In general, the supply of, in economics, when demand increases faster than supply, that tends to make the price of renewable energy rise a little bit. But price has been fairly stable over the last couple of years. But we do know this, that if we don't increase demand for renewable energy, then generators won't build. So they do need that increased demand signal that we're trying to, the biggest signal is the state's renewable portfolio standard, but then we're trying to add to that. And so so far we think it's working. Where's the green electricity going to come from? Right now, if you look at our map, it's onshore wind and it's solar on rooftops and on, in some cases, brownfields. But over time, you'll see a lot more solar. You'll see, but where we're going to get a lot of electricity, it's hard to actually paint a good picture of it. But the offshore wind projects are going to be an enormous contributor to our electricity grid over time. And we're expecting Vineyard Wind to come online in a little bit more than a year. And then we've got Commonwealth Wind, we've got Mayflower Wind, we've got Revolution Wind, and several other projects that are under development. And the state of Massachusetts is going to be procuring more renewable energy, more offshore wind. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts is also likely to be purchasing more large wind projects from the state of Maine. There's a possibility that you may have heard that there's a hydro project in Canada where the utilities in Massachusetts have signed contracts to purchase that electricity. It would require, however, transmission lines coming through Maine, and that is currently in court. So if that project doesn't happen, there's a possibility that Massachusetts will replace that with the projects onshore in Maine. But the key point we want to make is it's really going to be coming from offshore wind, and when it starts coming, it's going to start coming in big numbers. So one question we have is, what are the Massachusetts sources for green electricity? And that, again, I think the map is showing that we're buying power from wind turbines in Gloucester, Lynn, Medford, Hull, Situate, Plymouth, out to Worcester, and several more. That's where most of our power, also a lot of solar projects in Massachusetts, some anaerobic digestion, some low impact hydro as well.
Our next question is, what explanations has the DPU provided for why it has been taking them so long to approve the CEA's aggregation plans?
I have not seen a good answer, and I know that some legislators are asking the DPU directly, and I if it's a matter of staffing, they could be, I think the legislature would authorize some additional resources for the Department of Public Utilities. One of the things that is a problem in my viewpoint is that by state law, a city or town that wants to aggregate has to have their project, their plan approved by the State Department of Public Utilities. For the most part, the plans are like 90% the same. There's very little differentiation because the communities know what is expected of their plans. But there is no deadline by statute by when the department would have to respond to a local plan. Whereas many other things that the Department of Public Utilities has to approve, they have to approve within a certain timeline that's written right into the law. That might be solar regulations, or it might be the procurement of electricity by the utilities. The grid modernization dockets I told you about have to be dealt with by a certain time. Rate cases, when they want to go in for a rate increase, that has to be dealt with by a certain time. And so I think what happens is the Department of Public Utilities just puts it on the, puts it at the bottom of the pile. But otherwise they've not made a public statement that I know of as to why they take so long. There are other questions. Can you see those, Mikaela?
I can, yes. This next one I could probably answer. Have you any insight into the RECs that competitive suppliers are buying, and what's the average price for Class 1 Massachusetts recs. So because we're not constantly, but we're purchasing renewable energy certificates pretty frequently, depending on communities that come online or variances in usage. So if the towns and our green power members are using a lot more electricity because it's a very hot summer, like our July has been, we have to sort of meet that demand and purchase additional recs. So we have some insight into the market prices for recs. We don't necessarily have have insight into the specific recs that competitive suppliers are buying, but you can see sometimes from their disclosure documents what their supply is coming from. So sometimes they'll distinguish that it's national wind recs or wind recs from Texas or wherever. So that would be the sort of publicly available insight that you'd have there. And then the average price for Class 1 Massachusetts recs, it changes based on the year that the recs are generated. So any recs that are generated in 2022 are currently anywhere between $35 and $40, depending on the type of rec or how many, or the volume you're buying, or things like that. So the price varies based on the year that they're generated, and they're traded on a market, kind of like anything else would be.
Another question is, do we promote the purchase of wind power from wind power facilities documented to be adversely affecting neighbors that might be deemed non-compliant or a public health nuisance? And if so, are communities informed of this? We showed you the map of where we're getting the power from. We're probably more transparent in that regard than any other energy supplier you could find. We think that the projects that we're buying from are in harmony with the community. But sometimes you can't make everyone happy. There sometimes are people who will complain about a project, and I think it's has not been documented that wind turbines are a public health threat. Some people don't like to see them or hear them, and we understand that. But years ago, the Department of Public Health and the Department of Environmental Protection studied that issue, and so we're pretty comfortable. We see that the projects are quite good, but again, we'll be seeing the future will be offshore wind projects that are getting a lot of scrutiny as well. The next question: are you working on price reduction projections based upon the rate of decreasing green energy expenses versus non-green sources? That's a question from Laura. We're not making projections on that, but I think we can take a minute to acknowledge that right now, our economy needs to recognize that wind power is actually coming in at a lower price per kilowatt hour. New projects, the offshore wind projects that I've talked about, are going to come in at a lower price than what we're paying for electricity generated from natural gas. And so Massachusetts is going to stand to benefit. Every time you see a wind turbine go up offshore, it's going to be a good thing for consumers all around. Scott asked, what's the recommended approach for a town government looking at this? Is there a board of selectmen decision typically than the DPU? Every town is a little different. Sometimes the board of selectmen have the final say. Sometimes it's town meeting. Scott, if you want to email us with your community, we can look into that as to where you are with that. I'm at Larry at greenenergyconsumers.org, and Mikaela's at Mikaela at greenenergyconsumers.org. So sometimes it takes a while to put it on if it's a town meeting, having the powers that be put it on a warrant, and then it goes to town meeting. And then after that, it goes, the town has to put together a plan, and then the plan has to be approved by the Department of Public Utilities. Linda's asking, can I give you some language we could use to write our state reps about delays in DPU approval? We can help you with that. Again, you can email us, and but essentially, it's town by town specific. If you want to know how long your community has been waiting, we could tell you that, because there's a DPU website that tracks all that, and we pay attention to that. But basically, I think it would be a very healthy thing for a state representative or a state senator to ask the DPU why a particular community's plan is being held up. Peter's asking a question. I hope I answered. How do you get your town to join community aggregation? If it's a town, again, you've got to persuade your selectmen or town meeting members. And usually that's done by, we can support you as well, give you some facts, and it involves pulling together. A lot of communities have an energy committee that studies this kind of material and can make a recommendation. So we'd be happy to work with anybody. Do you see any other questions, Mikaela?
Nope, I think that's all of them for now, unless anyone wants to add.
Right. Well, we're here for a few more minutes if anyone has further questions. I hope this was helpful.
And if you want to read into the report itself, which goes into a little bit more detail, you can go to our website and you can find it there.
We're doing another version of this tonight at what, 7:30?
7:30, yes.
And I'm seeing a note that Needham will be voting on aggregation at their fall town meeting. That's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
They've been waiting for Needham.
Peter asked, can an individual join I think meeting, which means municipal aggregation that's not in his town? That would be in.
No, unfortunately, that is not possible. But you can buy green electricity through us. We do offer it to individuals. You can go to our website and you can look into that. But I have to, having done this for 20 years on an individual basis, and then with aggregation since 2016, it's pretty clear that communities that can aggregate should aggregate. And so you end up getting a better price by having municipal aggregation. And then here's a question. Are we promoting solar on built infrastructure versus clear cutting forest? By and large, the solar that we're supporting are on built infrastructure. Some of the larger projects are actually on brownfields projects and a lot of rooftops. And we're very careful about putting solar on open space. But, I guess I'll have to also make the comment that we're going to be facing some decisions as a society in the next 20 years, which is how do we reduce greenhouse gases? And if we do have to, if we don't want to clear cut forest, as Laura was questioning, we're going to have to use less electricity. We're going to have to be more efficient in how we run our cars, run our homes, and run our businesses. And so we've got to face up to that. Otherwise, we'll be needing more wind turbines and solar panels than necessary. But it's absolutely essential that we get our greenhouse gas budget under control. And then one question is, how can we be confident about the legitimacy of non-class 1 RECs from wind farms out of state? Well, we're suggesting that aggregations stick to just class 1 RECs. Doesn't have to be from Massachusetts. Where in New England, the 6 New England states are part of a unified power system. And so environmentally, and economically and whatever, it doesn't matter much whether it's from Massachusetts or Maine or New Hampshire. The power flows into the grid. You can think of it as a big bathtub where all the generators in New England are all faucets going into the bathtub, and all the consumers are taking it out the bottom. And so the system supports projects from all over New England. And there's a tracking system. So if it's a wind turbine in Maine or Massachusetts and it's selling a renewable energy certificate, there's a way to track where that went. And so there's no double counting. That seems to have cleared the questions for now. If there are any more, we're still here. If electricity is expensive, won't manufacturing go to where it's cheap, like coal country, I guess is the question. Well, what we're trying to say is electricity right now is expensive primarily. I want to make sure you understand this, Brian. Natural gas and oil and coal right now is more expensive than offshore wind. There's no question about that. And the rise in electricity prices that we have seen in the last few months is related to why gasoline prices rose. It's why, if you've been tracking, if you heat with natural gas prices have risen, and it's tied to the war in Ukraine. Where Vladimir Putin is restricting how much gas is going into Europe. Europe is trying to get away from buying oil and gas from Russia, and that's causing supply problems. And the shock to the system is because of fossil fuels. It's not because of renewable energy. And so the problem with the offshore wind projects I talked about is that they're not already here. We would be insulated from these high electricity prices if we had more of it. And this is a problem that is worldwide. This is not tied to New England. Europe right now has extraordinarily high electricity prices, much higher than what we have, and it's going to be a difficult winter in Europe. And so, no, we don't think the answer is. We don't even think it makes sense for a manufacturer to try to pick a state to build because of where it might have coal. And I'll add, with the recent bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, that's just going to make going green cheaper, and it's going to make it better. It's going to make it. We're going to get to our goals faster because of the federal law. And so we think it's now the right time for Massachusetts to lean in to that. Well, Brian, you think that offshore wind will drive up electricity prices? We just don't see it that way. Any other questions? Well, with that, I want to thank you all, and I'll give you back some time in your lunch hour. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Have a good day.